Hello, everybody. We're going to talk about dependent clauses and how we use them and how you can use them in your writing and how to identify them and all that fun stuff that comes when you think of dependent clauses. The first thing you're probably asking yourself is, what is a dependent clause? A dependent clause is a group of words with a subject and a predicate, but it does not express a complete thought. And I know we've talked about how a sentence needs a subject and a predicate and how that is what makes a sentence, and that is true, but there is ways that the rules kind of not followed. So the way that this happens is that they have a subordinating conjunction. I've talked about awubis words. These are awubis words, and then some other ones. So some of these words shown here, there are more than this, you will see at the beginning of clauses. If you see them at the beginning of a clause, that makes that clause a dependent clause. So you can see some of these words are which, while, when, whenever, a lot of W words, although, that, because, and so forth. So we're going to look and see how these look in a sentence to kind of show you what we're talking about here. So these are all examples of dependent clauses. Because my grandma loves grapes. After the car ride. Since you've been gone. Kelly Clarkson fans out there. These are dependent clauses. Okay, every one of these is a dependent clause. Right, those three. Now you can see I've highlighted the subordinating conjunctions in green. That is what makes them dependent clauses. If I were to just have gotten rid of this, and I turn these capital and I put a period at the end, magic. It now is a complete sentence. My grandma loves grapes. It's a subject right here, my grandma. There's a predicate right here with loves. It's a complete thought. Same thing. Well, this one's a little bit different, you can see, so it doesn't always work. And right here, you've been gone is a complete thought. However, putting these words in front of it makes them no longer a complete thought. So that, these right here, these green ones, which I'll turn this one green for you again, these are your subordinating conjunctions. And the whole group of words is your dependent clause. Okay? So I will pause. I will give you a chance to work on this. You should pause the video. I will start back up in about 10 seconds. And I want you to work on these, and we will go over the answers. I want you to find the dependent clauses in these sentences. And remember, dependent clauses start with a subordinating conjunction, and it's that whole thought that goes along with that. And we'll come back for those of you that are finished. Make sure that you're working on these so you can get your practice on that. So the dependent clauses in here are starting with the subordinating conjunction. So in this sentence, the subordinating conjunction is right here. It is because. That's your subordinating conjunction, which means that this whole thing, because I always try to steal his gecko, is the dependent clause. Okay? The part that goes with it is usually going to be able to stand by itself. My mom decided that I wasn't allowed to go to my friends. That stands by itself. That's an independent clause. But because this right here, because of this subordinating conjunction right here, this is your dependent clause. The next one, before I go home, I need to stop at the mall and pick up my new wig. The dependent clause is this one right here. Now, why is that? Because of the word before. That's your subordinating conjunction. So that makes it dependent. It depends on the other sentence to make it go. If you just said the sentence, you can't say the sentence, before I go home. Before I go home, what? It's not a complete thought. You need a second part to it. And the third one, my sister always asks what I'm doing while I'm playing my video games. Again, we need to find that subordinating conjunction. And in this case, it's right here. It's while. So our dependent clause is right here. It comes after it. While I'm playing video games. You can't say that by itself because it's not a complete thought. While I'm playing video games, what? Okay? Moving on to this next part. When you're writing dependent clauses, it needs to be paired with an independent clause. It needs to be put with a sentence, with a clause that can stand on its own. So if we look here, before I get a pet squirrel, I need to get a rabies shot. I need to get a rabies shot can stand by itself. You could just say that by itself. I need to get a rabies shot. You could say that, which is why it's independent. It can stand on its own. However, this over here, before I get a pet squirrel, you need something else to connect with it. And so it's being connected with the independent clause. No need to call the ambulance because the bone is barely showing. Okay? Because the bone is barely showing is our dependent clause, and it gets put with an independent clause. No need to call the ambulance. There's no need. And the third one, I will always pick up the phone when there are cookies involved. When there are cookies involved is our dependent clause. Can't stand on its own. Needs to be paired with something else. So it gets paired with, I will always pick up the phone. That would stand on its own. So if you see in all of these examples, all of them have a dependent clause and an independent clause. Sometimes they're at the end, sometimes they're at the beginning, but they do need to be paired together. Now, you might ask yourself, because you're so very comically inclined, it's a joke, if a sentence, should you put a comma there or not? So if a sentence starts with a subordinating conjunction, which would make it the first clause would be dependent. You put a comma at the end of the dependent variable. So, as an example, this sentence, although it was cold, it wasn't cold. I brought a jacket anyway. So the first clause here is our dependent clause because it starts with this word right here. It starts with a subordinating conjunction. So because of that, you put a comma after the dependent clause. It's usually when you take a pretty big break. It's when you take a big pause in your speech. Although it wasn't cold, I brought a jacket anyway. So you can kind of hear the pause, but you want to put it at the end of the coordinating or at the dependent clause. If a sentence has a subordinating conjunction in the middle of the sentence, which would make it the second clause would be dependent, you do not put a comma. So I don't need to go home until it is dark because the second half is our dependent clause. In that case, you do not put a comma. So you put a comma if it starts the sentence. If it doesn't start the sentence, you do not put a comma. So here's a little more practice for you. I will again start up in about 5-10 seconds. So pause it now if you would like to work on this without the answers. Okay, so looking at these, we're looking for the dependent clauses and we're looking to see if we put a comma. The dependent clause, after we got home from the park, we sat and took a group nap. Our dependent clause is after right here, which means that we do put a comma because it starts the sentence. And so we have to find where does this dependent clause stop. After we got home from the park, we sat and took a group nap. It goes right there. Here is our comma. After we got home from the park. This is our independent clause. This is dependent. Next one. We will not rest until the price of cheese goes down. All right, we are running out of time, so I quickly highlighted all of the answers here. You will see that any of them that start with these dependent clauses have commas in the sentence after the dependent clause. So you can take a chance to look at those and see how you did. And then finally, a summary. This is everything that we kind of talked about, dependent clauses, subordinating conjunctions, and when to put a comma. So thank you for listening for the last 10 minutes about the exciting world of dependent clauses.